Father Roman, and it's the pleasure for me to be here, and good evening to all participants. As Father mentioned, my name is Roman Nazarenko, and I just want to add some statements more that I'm making my PhD thesis in the Tilburg University in the Netherlands, and it is dedicated to Islamic-Christian dialogue. And also I'm working in Kiev Mohila Business School, where I'm also, let's say, working in the realm of Islamic world or Arab world, but concentrating more on the, let's say, communication, business, marketing strategy, and how to Arab people, and how to catch their mentality and to be successful, I mean, in that region. And about the Arabic, I'm learning Arabic. That's the big difference, and this language is really, let's say, really difficult, but it's exciting journey, so I'm really enjoy it. And actually, in this morning, I have the lecture, my Arabic lessons. So Arabic is exciting stuff, and if some of you want to join me and to learn Arabic, it will be great. So today, I will try to describe you some statements or some periods dedicated to the Islamic-Christian relationships and engagement. And honestly speaking, I want to have, let's say, half of our meeting with my small speech, and another part is, I hope, we will have discussion, because when it goes about the Islam and Christianity, it's also always a lot of questions, a lot of issues, polemics, and etc. So I will present you and describe you, let's say, 4 periods that, from my point of view, is the most essential in the realm of interreligious dialogue, or even, let's say, engagement between Islam and Christianity, and then we will have the discussion. The relationship between Christianity and other religions, especially Islam, let's say, it takes place in the non-religious world, with pandemic and all questions, is like one of the most important questions posed of our time. And whereas Vatican II can be considered as the official beginning of the dialogue with Islam from the Catholic perspective, this positive stand has not remained unchallenged. And an increasing number of voices within the Catholic Church, and even within my church, Greek Catholic Church, is skeptic about, or even hostile sometimes, to Muslim-Christian dialogue. So I guess that we can start from the first period. I call this polemics, and our information about Islam and the Byzantine literature before the beginning of the 8th century is scant. And it is well known that the spiritual and intellectual meeting of the Prophet Muhammad and the first generations of his followers was with Christianity, but not an official meeting, let's say, with Orthodox Church or whatever, but with the Monophysites and Nestorian communities, who made up the majority of the Christian population in Arabia, Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia. In this case, we can mention the name of Saint John Damascus. He's usually headed by a list of Christian anti-Muslim polemists. And John of Damascus in the 8th century provided the first coherent treatment of Islam, underestimated this new religion seen is something like hostile. His encounter with Muslims in the Umayyad administrative and military center of Damascus, I guess you heard about this, led him to regard Islam not as an alien tradition, but as the Christian heresy. And this is a really important point. Only as an example, the Saint John of Damascus translated some statements of the Islamic teachings, which he described as ridiculous. And the source of such an assessment for John of Damascus is authoritative for him in many matters, Maximus the Confessor, the witness of the beginning of the Arab conquest. So this is the first part where the image of Islam was hostile or dedicated or described as the Christian heresy. When it goes about the Byzantine relationship with Islam, so firstly, the Byzantines viewed Islam as kind of, I don't know, a revival of Arianism. And the Christian criticism of Islam and Islamic criticism of Christianity were primarily concerned with Jesus Christ, of course, and the dogma of the Holy Trinity. The traditional Christian polemic with Islam followed wide traditional patterns and intended to demonstrate 5 points. First, the failure of Islam compared to Christianity. The second, the groundlessness of Muhammad's claims to the prophet mission. Then the next one, the baselessness of the claims of Muslims that the Quran is the word of God. Number 4, the supposedly immoral lifestyle of Muslims. And the number 5, the Quran itself confirms the Christian truth. And the main goal for Christian polemic was to prove that the Muhammad was a false prophet, based on these 5 arguments. Number 1, there were no witness to buttress the claim that Muhammad had received a revelation. In contrast, when, for example, Moses received a revelation from God, the whole nation was a witness, which is absent, of course, with the case of Muhammad. Number 2, Muhammad slept alone in a cave when God spoke to him, in contrast to the biblical God who appeared in a fire in a storm and a storm. Number 3, none of the preceding prophets foreshadowed the mission of Muhammad. Number 4, Muhammad did not perform any miracles, in contrast to Jesus, even in the Quran, because we know that there are a lot of miracles in the Quran that are mentioned that was made by Jesus. Even more, there are several, and even there are several miracles that are absent in the Bible but present in the Quran. And number 5, Muhammad could not predict what would happen shortly. And this is also in contrast to Jesus, Isa ibn Maryam, mentioned in the Quran. The next period, I call this from polemics to mission. In this case, we can, I guess we can remember that Peter, the French abbot of the Benedictine Abbey of Cluny, I'm sure you know him. He was one of the first in the West to attempt to engage a more or less meaningful dialogue with Muslims. In 1143, he asked Robert from Caton, prepared the first, let's say, honestly partial, but first translation of the Quran in Latin. And despite the, let's say, mistakes, we can underline that this was the first attempt. And Caton's translation adapted the language and the style of the Quran to conform more closely to European literature standards and remain the standard Latin translation for 4 centuries. A century later, Thomas Aquinas, for example, showed some interest in the philosophical side of Islam. However, he still had little good to say of Muhammad or of Islamic religious practice in general. In the medieval period, the scholars of both Islam and Christianity were chiefly concerned to show the errors and weaknesses of the other religion. However, Christians would claim that during the last 200 years, their scholars have been more, let's say, moving towards a positive appreciation of Islam, and the claim is confirmed by some facts that some Muslims have admitted being helped to a deeper understanding of Islam by Western scholars, by Christian scholars. And the main rhetoric about Islam was covered by the idea that it is not Christian heresy, but as a religion sui generis. This approach became the leading idea of the religious studies of Islam, in which the Christian position became less the determinative point of the departure. This position should not be confused with the dialogue approach, however, and I want to underline this point. During the second half of the 17th century, the Ottoman aggression and the battle occurred in Vienna in September 11, 1683, except the prophetic and, of course, eschatological interpretations, like Muhammad is the sign of the end of the times, and etc., is the devil, and etc., had an important effect on the missions to Muslims, both in Europe as well in the Islamic lands. And in the end of the 17th century, Europe saw a multiplication of books written by the religious order, well known for us, of course, that called the Society of Jesuits, and related to Islam and to the missions which preach to Muslims. They published, let's say, handbooks, they call it handbooks, for the conversion of Muslims, books of controversies, transcriptions of real or imaginary dialogues between Muslims and Catholic, and etc., etc. The Jesuits took an interest in Islam from the beginning, and starting from the Ignatius Loyola, he definitely did not give up on his ideas of a mission to Muslims, even if they take a back seat. During his let's say he tried also to organize a special institutes, or for example Arabic speaking house in Messina, or a college for the study of Arabic, a study program in Islam in Malta, and with plans for projects aimed at the mission to Muslims in Beirut, Cyprus, and Tunisia. By 1650, with the permission of the Sultan and under protection of French ambassador, Jesuits were living and working in many parts of Ottoman Empire, as Izmir, Aleppo, Damascus, and Lebanese Tripoli, and so on. The next step after this communication and disengagement from the Catholic orders with Muslim world, the next step I call the religious studies. And the religious studies were developed especially in the 19th century with some earlier pioneers, of course, in the 18th century. The ideal way was to study Islam as a religion sui generis without being led by personal convictions, be it positive or negative. In the 19th century, many manuscripts of Islam were edited for the first time in a scholarly way, not apologetic way or missionary way. Islamic studies were often conducted in the separation from Christian theology, and undoubtedly this has led to a more, let's say, more positive or balanced attitude to Islam, especially when in the 20th century, not only manuscripts from the past, but also contemporary Islam became an object of study by travelers and anthropological research, scholar research, scriptural research, and etc. Also, the students of Islam were often Christians themselves, as my example, for example, and they aimed to minimize the influence of their religious convictions, but trying to understand and to learn about this religion without their knowledge that they get before. And the next step, if it's possible, I will read the chat a bit later in order to have, if you have some questions there, I'm not sure. So we will have time for this. And the next period I call the interreligious dialogue, and I guess that I'm not sure, but I hope that Taras, the lecture before, has mentioned the Nostra Aetate and the Second Vatican Council. So if not, I'm just in 2 words will remain this information. The Second Vatican Council, 1960s, and the really first time in the history of the Catholic Church it was officially mentioned some statements about Islam. We'll look at a bit later. But what is interesting that the preparation period to the council from 1960 till 1961, where few people spoke about the importance of a document about Islam. Only during the council it was decided to enlarge the so-called Declaration about Jews to incorporate the relationship with Islam, which would become the Declaration Nostra Aetate. So Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism, it was added later, but firstly it was, let's say, prepared as only document for dedicated to Judaism. The role of religious orders in Islamic countries played an important role in the reorientation of the Catholic Church toward Islam, especially before the council. And many Catholic scholars of Islam had stayed for a longer period in Islamic countries, and then the Islamic scholar, for example, Louis Massignon and his disciples were quite, let's say, invited, and they were influential, let's say. They were influential because of the introduction of the concept of the Abrahamic religions, that we are going from the one root from Abraham or Ibrahim, as it mentioned in the Islamic tradition. Massignon recognized in Islam a heritage from one face of Abraham. And on this foundation, he built his lifelong campaign for the better mutual relationship between Christians and Muslims. And actually, the fruit of his efforts is to be seen in the references to Muslims in the Vatican II documents like Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate, where the figure of Abraham takes a central place in this declaration, as well as in the ecumenical efforts of the present-day Secretariat for Non-Christian Religions and of the Pontifical Institute for Arab Studies in Rome. What I want to also to mention here, that the considering the position of the Roman Catholic Church towards Islam and the interreligious dialogue in general, it should be noted especially Nostra Aetate, then and also the other documents that are present, the interreligious aspects, like it's not only in the Nostra Aetate, of course. So we are talking about the Lumen Gentium, Gaudium et Spes, Ad Gentes, and the Ecclesiam Suam, that were revolutionary and innovative. This novelty of these documents consists of four fundamental principles. Firstly, for the first time, the Catholic Church officially acknowledged the presence of genuine religious values in the Muslims' faith and the religious belief. So in Islam, for the first time in the Catholic Church history of the Catholic Church. Secondly, in those statements, the Catholic Church acknowledges that both Muslims and Christians are worshiping the same God. Also, they express their beliefs differently. Thirdly, the Catholic Church, for the first time in the history, officially acknowledged that the Muslims esteem and veneration of Abraham, Jesus, and Mary. And also, it is not in the document, but I can add it from myself, and also John the Baptist, like Yahya, and other biblical figures from the Old Testament and New Testament. And fourthly, for the first time, the Catholic Church called both Christians and Muslims to come together by forgetting the past and striving sincerely for mutual understanding in order to promote peace, liberty, peace building, reconciliation, social justice, moral values, for benefit, let's say, for the benefit of all humankind. So in this, that is why the Second Vatican Council and all these declarations and documents were so important, and it was completely new for the Catholic Church. Because I guess you heard about the soteriological exclusivism, that there are no salvation outside the Catholic Church. So then the Vatican Council said, yes, it's true, but nobody knows these borders, like typical Vatican diplomacy. But I will leave it. Later, after the Second Vatican Council, I can only add that the fruits, and that there were a lot of achievements on the realm of interreligious dialogue between Christians and Muslims, especially provided by figures, by famous popes like John Paul II. I guess he was one of the most important person and figure dedicated to the Christian-Muslim dialogue. There are a lot of issues, there are a lot of achievements that John Paul II did, but I will only, let's say, underline some of them. He kissed the Quran in the mosque in the Damascus in Syria, and it was completely shocked situation by the cardinals, and also in Rome. It was a huge opposition to John Paul II, but he declared that Islam and Christianity, as he mentioned and as he called this, our brethren. Also the prayer in Assisi, and I can also remember his trip to Casablanca, Morocco in 80s, where he had, let's say, not lecture, but as a speech to 80,000 young Muslims at the stadium. Also, we can remember the Pope Francis and his Fratelli Tutti, famous Fratelli Tutti, and even in that document, he mentioned that he was inspired by a Muslim to write this text. I mean, this also shows the huge heritage and the huge perspective for interreligious dialogue. Of course, we need to mention the Pope Benedict and his famous Regensburg speech, but again, I guess you know about this controversy that the Pope it was not his purpose to say something bad about Islam, but he was quoted the Byzantine emperor who said bad stuff about Prophet Muhammad and the Islam, and that is why it was kind of tension. But Pope Francis completely fixed it, let's say. And even in nowadays, as a conclusion, and I just want to mention that nowadays Islamic Christian dialogue consists not only the theological perspective, that is my topic for this meeting, but also the political moments and also the cultural aspects. As a small example, we can remember the visitation of Pope Francis to Dubai, to Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, and where they discussed the interreligious perspectives from the, let's say, official point. But some voices from Vatican told me that another purpose was to let's say, to protect Qatar and all this Qatar diplomatic crisis in order to let's say, to calm down the tension that was in the Middle East after Donald Trump and his visitation to Saudi Arabia, and then Qatar diplomatic crisis. So even in that case, I'm sure you know about this stuff. So even in that case, the interreligious engagement is really important. So I don't want to concentrate only on interreligious dialogue, as interreligious dialogue is only one part of engagement or relationships or communication between Muslims and Christians. Also, there is the hostile, let's say, communication, aggression, but also it's kind of also we have the engagement, the cooperation, and etc. So when it goes about the Islamic and Christian engagement, the dialogue takes the first step and leading the process. So as we may see from the beginning of Islam, from the 7th and 8th century, there is a kind of, we can see the dynamic that starting from the apologetic and starting from the hostile image of Islam, the Catholic Church tried to review its attitude to Islam from apologetic to religious studies, from religious studies and also the mission, conversion, then to dialogue, kind of trying to find the communication and not just to, let's say, communicate with Muslims or Islam that they heard from legends or poems, but trying to learn the text, learning the Quran itself, and also trying to understand what kind of religion it is, and then only trying to, let's say, communicate with Muslims. And also from Muslim part, I guess we will have questions like this, but I just want to underline that even from the Muslim perspective, it's the special place dedicated to Christians. And in Arabic and in the Quran, it is mentioned like Ahl al-Kitabu, the people of the book. And it is mentioned even this statement that there are several types of people. So the believers, the Muslims, the non-believers, and the Ahl al-Kitabu, so the people of the book. It's like Jews and Christians. And it is important, not just a statement in the Quran, but also it is important that, for example, for men, it is Islam gives and the Quran gives the recommendation to marry, for example, Muslim girl. But if there are no Muslims, like, for example, in Lviv, in my city, or in Kiev, where we have the medical university, and there are a lot of students from the Arab countries. So imagine that the young student from Arab country want to find his future wife, but if there are not so many Muslims in this area, it is possible for him to find the Christian girl or Jew. So it is forbidden for him to join, let's say, to find the non-believer or agnostic, atheist girl or whatever. So even this statement of Ahl al-Kitab mentioning that the Quran really, let's say, shows kind of special attitude to Muslims and Jews. And there are a lot of also information about Jesus, that, and especially Mary, that presented in the Quran, but lacking in the Bible. So the Quran gives more information about Mary than the Bible, and more information about Jesus and his young years than the Bible. Of course, we can say that it is inspired by the apocryphal literature, etc. But for Muslims, I mean, that's to people, to his people. So even from both perspectives, we can see that there are a lot of, let's say, positive connection between these two religions, but also it's we do not. I usually repeating this phrase that we need to avoid the interreligious romanticism about the religions and we are all brethren. It's not about the eclecticism or syncretism that we need to create something like universal religion, then where Muslims and Christians will be in the same religion. But interreligious dialogue have some kind of limits dedicated to that we need to learn about the other religion in order to inspire our own faith. And this is actually part of my PhD thesis. And in this case, I want, with this small example, I want to finish my small talk. My PhD thesis is, let's say, dealing with the scriptural reasoning. Maybe you heard about this. It's the like new method or way of interreligious dialogue that emerged like 30 years ago in Oxford. And it is, well, scriptural reasoning is about that. Just imagine the group where one Jew, Muslim, and Christian, and they are reading only their own scriptures. For example, one topic like the creation of world, yes. And so the Jew is reading his own text, the Christian reading his own text, and the Muslim reading his own text, and only dealing with his own text. Not, let's say, giving the comments to another participant. Only I can ask some questions, but not. I cannot trying to explain what Quran actually means, because this job only for Muslim. And why this method is important? I always mention that scriptural reasoning is important because dealing with the Quran, I'm learning more and I'm deepening my own Christianity. For example, in this meeting we had one topic about the creation of God and the paradise story, the creation of world and the paradise story. And it is in the Quran, it is clearly mentioning that Iblis, the, let's say, demon, Satan, and whatever, he was jinn, not an angel, but jinn, because angels are lack of free will in Islam, only jinns, so they can be good or bad. And the Iblis, the main evil hero, let's say, the main evil figure, devil. So he tempted the Adam and Hawa, yes, a man, and it is clearly written. But so I heard his speech, and then I returned to my own scripture. I read the text, and then I said that, well, in Christianity we also have mentioning that the demon was tempted Adam and Eve, and etc. But then the moderator stopped me and said, "Hey, wait a minute. It is not written demon, it is written snake." And then I stopped, that this is my theology, which is really important, and etc. It's helped me to understand more. But in the Bible, in the concrete parts of the book of Genesis, it is mentioned about the snake. So that poses me some questions, whether the snake was agent of devil, or whether devil became the snake in the paradise. I don't know. So that creates more and more question. And this is the main important idea of the scriptural reasoning, trying to pose as many questions as possible. So maybe it sounds strange or ridiculous, I don't know, but learning and listening the Quranic accounts, Quranic stories, I deepen in this case, my Christianity and my understanding of the Bible. So even in these creative ways, we can develop this interreligious engagement, not trying to convert each other or create, let's say, one religion, and just trying to understand more and more in order to reduce the tension that we have in the modern world. Thank you so much. So as I mentioned in the beginning, it was my half of our lecture I spent to my speech, but then if you still have some energy, it will be, I'm sorry. Yes, can you hear me now? Okay, so it will be a pleasure for me to have a small discussion with you about the Islam and Christianity and the interreligious engagement. So, do we have any questions or remarks? I'm not sure whether the moderator is here, so, but you are free to contact. And also, while you are thinking about this, I also want to add, as actually the moderator asked me to do this, the really small remark, and there will be Haji, your question about the situation in Ukraine, because in Ukraine we have several spiritual administrations of Muslims, and what is interesting that Ukraine, let's say, is the brilliant example of interreligious dialogue, where the Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, and the various of Christian denominations, and especially a huge amount of Protestant, let's say, denominations in Ukraine, we are all together communicating with the president, with parliament, and etc. That was really strange and almost impossible in the Netherlands. But I spent 5 years there, and the religious leaders told me that I will not sit there because of when the politics is here, and etc. etc. But what do we have in Ukraine? That the brilliant, maybe because of war, I don't know, it's the huge discussion, but we have the brilliant example of interreligious exchange. However, 90% of Muslims were lived in 3 regions that are now, let's say, annexed by Russian Federation. So that is why it is really difficult to count how many Muslims we have in Ukraine. But still, there are some spiritual organizations that are not in a contact with each other because of the, let's say, I will say, like, foreign influences. Yes, but that's Ukrainian case. Yes, we have question.
Yeah, I think let me start. Thank you very much for your presentation. Really, it's very interesting, and I hope we can get a copy of your presentation, because I'm was struck by how you trace the roots and when the Muslim community or Muslim scholars started to, at least in the modern sense, uh, open to have a dialogue with other religions like Christianity, specifically. But my question is, because now we are facing, the rise of, or the emergence of, religious fundamentalism or religious nationalism. So how's now, in the context of Ukraine, uh, how they deal with this um, uh, emergence, religious fundamentalism or fundamentalist, dogmatic, literalist emergence within Islamic community or Islamic scholars. And second, is there any diversity of, for example, you have this Sunni, and they have this Shia. Yeah, I'm interested what Muslim majority in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this question. Well, the Ukrainian context is really not interesting because it's important, but not so exciting, because all the stereotypes that we have in our country, they are coming from West. Because except the Spain and Reconquista and all this tension that was between Muslims and Christians in that period, and the France with all, let's say, tension with colonial wars in Europe, the Islam, let's say, has only like 70 or 60 years. After the Second World War, to help with the Turkish, let's say, workers, and then they started to rebuild the Germany. So starting from that period, we can see that more and more Muslims, let's say, moved to Europe. So let's say 50, 70 years. In Ukraine, we have more or less 1,000 years, the historical presence of Muslims, especially the Crimea Tatars. I'm originally from Crimea, that is now, let's say, annexed by Russia. But anyway, the Crimea Tatars and Crimea's Khanat, the Ottoman Empire, Seljuks, and we can see that the Islam is present on our territories like 1,000 years. So that is why it's not new to our country, but in Europe, especially Western Europe, we can see this tension. But I'm not trying to say that Muslims are saints or something like this, but for me, it's really important. For me, it's really clear that this is the game, the political game. We remember in Europe that there was some terrorist attacks in Madrid, Brussels, Paris, and Munich, and different, let's say, cities. And at that period, it was the Islamophobia, and everyone talked about Islam, the green army, the Islam will conquer Europe, and etc. But nowadays, nothing about this pandemic, etc. Nothing about the ISIS. Why? Because now it's not important. Oh, now it's important, but now it's not. This is useful. Let's say it's not important for some groups or for some countries. That is why the Islamic question is not anymore so valid, or it's not anymore so powerful. That is why the yellow newspapers like Charlie Hebdo, no pictures to Prophet Muhammad, and etc. So it's all about the politics. But also we need to realize that the refugees moved from the Arab world, especially from Syria. Well, some of them, let's say, I don't know for all people, but some of them were not like professors or whatever. That is why they showed kind of, they showed the image of Islam that it was not acceptable for Europeans. That is why in this case, I recommend you to read the Thilo Sarrazin. He's from Germany, a famous scholar, and he's really, let's say, against the Islam. But what is necessary to say that the tension between about Islamophobia and radicalism about Islam in Europe has several, let's say, roots and several issues. One of them, that when Angela Merkel in Germany, so they said, okay, the refugees, you can come to Europe, we are open, and etc. It was the big problem and the biggest mistake from my point of view, not just to, let's say, help people, help refugees, not in this case, but Europe used the blind tolerance politic. So they said, okay, we are open, this is our values, you're more than welcome, but then they expected that Muslims become the Dutch people or whatever, my experience. But later then they realized that Islamic paradigm, the Islamic way of thinking, it's impossible to change it. In Europe, you can see that I'm, let's say, Dutch, and I'm not a Christian. The secularization and all this stuff. In Islamic world, it is impossible. You cannot be, let's say, half religion or half not. So that is why these political issues, the Europe expected that Muslims became Europeans, and the Muslims expected that they will have all necessary, let's say, assistance and etc. Make the tension, because for Germany it's really difficult to pay for refugees, especially when they don't want to work or integrate and whatever. And this is the really hard, even for their economy. So it's more about the politic, and this case of pandemic, let's say, proved it to me that it's not about the Islamophobia or whatever. It's just when it will be necessary, Islamic radicalism will erase again. But what is necessary also to mention that, honestly speaking, it's the issue of Muslims for themselves, first of all. For example, in Ukraine, one of the leaders of the Islamic community, he's always, with help of his Facebook, he's always posted that we are against the, for example, terrorist attack in Christchurch in the New Zealand. We are against this, so it's not Islam. Islam is for peace, and etc. But Islamophobia and radicalism, it's not that the Western world, let's say Western world, will fix. it's first of all case of Muslim community. But you can see the ISIS, that the main target for ISIS was not the Christians, but Muslims from Shia and other Sunni, Shia, and whatever. So that's the issue. But and in Ukraine we have Salafites, Wahhabites, Sunni, Shia, and even some terrorist organizations that are so-called terrorists. I don't know. In some countries they are terrorists, in some not, and also not Al Qaeda, but Hizb ut-Tahrir, and but really small, and they are not influent. Well, they are not influential at all. So no influence from them. But Muslims in Europe is mostly, when it goes about Germany, it's Kurdistan, from Turkey. When it goes about France, it's Congo, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. When it goes about the Netherlands, it's Suriname. When it goes about the Britain, it's India and Pakistan. And in Ukraine, our main Muslim, let's say, group is coming from the post-Soviet countries like Uzbekistan or Tatarstan. We have a lot of Tatars in our country, but not Arabs or yeah, we do not have so many Arabs. So our Muslims are from Asia.
Thank you.
Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. Thank you. Bogdan?
Thank you for your informative lecture about Islam. I have a question about connection between Islam and Russian Orthodoxy. Simply, not so recently, I have heard information that representatives of Russian Orthodox Church sometimes like to say that Russian Orthodoxy is similar to Islam. I would like to ask you, is it information true or not? And when it is true, in which this similarity between Islam and Russian Orthodoxy is observed? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I'm not sure whether our colleagues are familiar with the Ukrainian or Russian background, but it's completely true, but only for one country, for Russia. So in Russia, it's completely true. The Muslim community, the main Muslim community, and the Russian Orthodox Church, they are similar in serving for their president. It's the completely political institution, nothing with the religion and etc. Well, there are actually two main groups of Muslims in Russia, but the strongest, the main one, they are completely like a Russian Orthodox Church serving the president. So in this case, as a joke, of course, they're similar, but in general, there are a lot of differences, and the structure and in Islamic community, they are, let's say, ethnic oriented. For example, okay, I will answer in this another way. That in Islam, there are in Russia there are different groups of Muslims. It's the big difference whether this Muslim is from Tatarstan, Kazan, or from Caucasus, or from the, let's say, western part of Russia, or even the eastern part. So it's completely different Muslims. That is why this whole Muslim community and like the all Russian Orthodox Church, we can see this name in the paper, but in the real life, it's not so influential. Even when we are talking about the Russian Orthodox Church, the 75% of active, not nominal, but active parishes are based in Ukraine. So that is why it was so important issue for Ukraine and Russia, this Tomos issue. I'm sure you're familiar with this. So of course, Islamic community and the Russian Orthodox community, they are totally different. But in case of Russia, they are using the same algorithm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Tomasz?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. I hope it's not completely off topic, but I wanted to ask about Pope Francis' recent trip to Iraq. It has been quite debated at the time, and I actually got into debate with an American evangelical on the internet, and he insisted that praying with other believers in Iraq is apostasy. And so I actually tried to argue with Nostra Aetate, and he responded with two arguments. First, he told me that the Pope was praying in the ziggurat, which is a pagan religious place, and it's absolutely unacceptable for him. And secondly, that he prays not only with Muslims but also with members of some another religions. I don't actually know which religions it was. I think he just called them Gnostics or so. And would you have any answer to these arguments? I actually didn't have.
Yes, thank you for this question. It's the huge debate, and it depends on let's say on your religious belief and your position. It's the same issue with the same question with whether there is the salvation outside the church. It's the same question. For example, I'm a Greek Catholic, and I can imagine that, let's say, let's take the biggest Muslim country in the world, like Indonesia. Just imagine in this the one of the smallest villages in Indonesia, there is the one guy. He's Muslim, and he's really serving the God. He's following his let's say Islamic belief and the Islamic principles, and etc. etc. And then he died. So my question for your friend from United States, whether this person will go to hell or to paradise. So that's the issue. I'm not sure whether my God is so, let's say, it's so hostile, then he can say, well, you're not Christian, I'm so sorry. I'm not sure. And that is why after the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church said, I repeat it again, that yes, and only with, let's say, during and with help of Jesus Christ, we can go to paradise. And there are no salvation outside the church, as it was before. So they repeated, but we do not know these borders. So from my point of view, the God, well, I'm not sure whether Muslims are here, so I don't want to say something bad about the Islam and etc. But from my point of view, in Islam, God is like a lawyer. He said, well, 51% good, 49% bad things. So I'm sorry. Oh, for example, you go to paradise. In Christianity, God is not about the law, but it's about love. And God, according to the Christian theology, can see deeply, can feel, can see, can hear deeply from heart. And I'm not sure whether my God is so, let's say, cruel that he said for this guy from Indonesia, you're out of paradise because you're not Christian. I'm not sure. So even in this case, I can continue that from my point of view, it is really nice and it is really important and necessary that all visiting the Islamic countries. These are the two biggest religions, and even from the political perspective, just to reduce the tension, it's really important. Another question: why he chose exactly this Muslim leader? Because in the Islamic world there are no any popes and the one leader, as you may know. In Egypt, in Russia, in Iraq, Iran, there are different leaders. So why he chose Iraq, I don't know. And I think that this is, well, it's not the best option. He traveled to Dubai, he can travel to Al-Azhar in Egypt, and in Saudi Arabia, in, let's say, Tunisia, but Iraq, and especially with this guy, I'm not sure whether it was the right choice, but I don't know. That's the Vatican diplomacy. Maybe they can say more about this. So that's the political. But from the theological perspective, that's completely, in a sense of Nostra Aetate, but also in the Old Testament story. I know that even in my university, some of the biblical scholars, they don't like when I mention this story, but I think that we have spark of truth in these lines. Do you remember the story from Testament with Hagar and Abraham and Ismail. Do you remember these stories? I'm not sure whether the group is familiar about the Sarah, Abraham, and okay, they asked God for child. Yes, and you remember that what said God to Abraham? He said, "Okay, leave." And how did he say? He said actually for Hagar, "Okay, leave this place. I will protect you." And then when Hagar was searching for water, maybe you remember this story. This actually Muslims repeated in Hajj. They are going 7 times from one lake to another lake in order to show this way that Hagar did with Ismail. What is really important, I do not have the English translation of this passage, but God said, and I will protect you, and I will how to say this in English? Тут є українською помножу твоє потомство. Може, ви допоможете мені? Хто тут, я бачу, українською спілкується? Помножу твоє потомство.
Multiply.
Okay, multiply, let's say, your generation or something like this. Thank you. So the God said to Hagar, no worries, I will protect you. I will multiply your generation. And that means, and he described, and he said that, yes, you will be the brother with Isaac, but you will live in Paran desert. And he described the way the Muslims live in the Arabia. So from my point of view, that's concrete. This biblical passage concrete shows that this generation that are followed from Ismail is from the one, let's say, Abraham roots. And that means that the Bible said that it's okay that from Abraham, there will be line from Isaac, that Christians and Jews coming from here, and also the line from Ismail, where the Muslims coming from. And if you ask a Muslim, the Muslims, for example, Muslims will never say that we are following the religion of Muhammad. They will also say that we are following the religion of Abraham, or Ismail. So for them, it's really important. And even the biblical account shows that God will protect these people, this nation. So from my point of view, we have the biblical roots that doesn't mean that Islam from the Christian perspective is the same, or you can be a Muslim, a Christian, or whatever. But it shows that we need to show, and we need to find the communication between those religions. I'm not sure whether it's okay that Pope kissed the Quran, John Paul II in Damascus. I'm not sure about this, but it's not a problem to go to mosque and to go to church for Muslims. Even in our Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, in Ukrainian Greek Catholic parish in Brussels, we had the same when the Muslims visited our church in order to have some, it was, I'm not sure, but it was like official meeting or whatever. And it was time for namaz, for praying time. And the imam asked whether he can, let's say, find some place for praying. And our priest said, okay, you can do your prayer in the church. No worries. So they find the Qibla, the Mecca direction, and then they start their praying. Nothing strange here. But again, we need to have some limits. It's not about eclecticism or syncretism, but it's about the limits that interreligious dialogue had. So nothing, I mean, I'm okay with this, but from the political perspective, I guess that the Pope, it's necessary for Pope to find some better companions for dialogue. Yes. But first, you need to unmute Katarzyna.
Yes, Katarzyna Jędraszczyk from Poland. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
Can you tell us something about Crimea Tatars and current religion and identity situation in Crimea?
What region?
Can you tell us about something about Crimea Tatars?
Okay.
Current religion and identity situation in Crimea. Maybe something about Orthodox Church of Ukraine after Tomos in Crimea too.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for this question. Well, you may of yes, you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
Okay. As you may know, now it's the part of Russian Federation, and well, it's really difficult to say complete or official information about Crimea Tatars. But what I can say that again, I will repeat it, that 90% of Muslims before 2014, before the war with Russia, so they lived in three regions. It's Donbass, so it's Donetsk region, Luhansk region, and Crimea. So all these three regions are now, let's say, partly or annexed by Russia. And after 2014, half of Crimea Tatars, they moved from Crimea, mostly to Kiev, first of all, mostly to Lviv or Kherson region. That's the closest region to Crimea. But then some of them moved or returned to Crimea, or another part, so they moved to Kiev. What we can say that there are few spiritual administrations of Muslims in Ukraine. Two of them were based in Ukraine, in Kiev, two in Donetsk, and two in Crimea. And now when we are talking about the Crimea Tatars in Crimea, we can say that there are two groups. One group is, let's say, under huge pressure by Russia, and they are, let's say, they are talking about the Ukraine as their own country, and they are against Russia. And there is another group that are pro-Russian, let's say, and the government officially said that, let's say, government helped two religious organizations in Crimea, the Russian Orthodox Church and the one part of Tavrisky Muftiat, let's say, and one part of Muslims of Crimea. So the community was split by two parts. One part pro-Ukrainian, but under the pressure, and another one, it's possible to build a mosque, it's possible to, let's say, to serve officially, and etc. In Ukraine nowadays, it's really, well, the Muslims, the people are really welcoming Muslims because of the Crimea Tatars, and because we have only like 1% or even less Muslims in Ukraine. So it's not so influential like in Europe, but in Europe it's also 6 or 7%. So it's not, despite the stereotypes, it's not so important. So let's say the politics of the Russian politics working, and they split the community. And this community, that part that are pro-Russian, of course they stay in Crimea, but another part that are against, so they split again for two parts. One are staying in Crimea, and another one moved to Ukraine, and let's say with hope, as I am actually, with hope to return to Crimea one day. So that's my answer. And they are liberal. Let's say they are liberal, and they are not conservative Muslims. We have the Ukrainian Council of Churches, official, let's say, official administrative, but administration where there are a lot of Christians, Christian denominations, and one only Muslim group, Sheikh Ahmed Tamim. So he represents the all Muslim community, but he's, let's say, from Lebanon, and he's had pro-Russian, let's say, activities, and he's not representing the Muslims as it is. But another groups are not in this religious council because of the political issues, because of the corruption. So that is why, unfortunately, we have some issues inside the Muslim community, despite the fact that the Muslims are really open to the interreligious dialogue, but inside the Muslim community, intra-religious aspects, they are really, some of them hate each other, and even they will not sit at the same table with another Muslim member. So they are really, we have this with Russian Orthodox Church and Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the same, that they will not, the Russians, the member of Russian Orthodox Church will not, let's say, join the meeting if the Greek Catholic priest or are there. So we have kind of tension really deep, but the huge, and the, let's say, in the basic level, it's everything is fine with religion in our country.
Thank you.
Yes. I guess. Thomas.
May I have just follow-up question to Katerina?
Yes.
You talk about the pro-Russian part of Crimean Tatars. Do you know how big is this pro-Russian part? Like, is it 20% to 80 or 50-50? Do we have any numbers? Thank you.
It was a bad connection. If it's possible to repeat this again.
Yes, sir. Yes, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, about the Crimean Tatar
Okay.
group.
Yeah. About the Crimean Tatars. You said that there is some pro-Russian part of them, and I just wonder how big is this part? Do we have some numbers?
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, it's really difficult to count because
or maybe just, is it the minority or?
no, it's the. I guess that this is half or like 50% or something like this, but I'm not sure, because it is impossible officially said that you are against Russia or you are the member of this Crimea Tatar group, because I guess maybe you heard about this, that there are a lot of let's say hundreds, not thousands, but hundreds of Crimea Tatars are now in the prisons in Russia, and the horrible stuff. Well, how it works. For example, the police can visit the mosque and say, okay, you have the Quran or another literature, and this literature is forbidden in Russia. So, and this literature, according to the Russian laws, is the extremist literature. And they have the special, let's say, the special law that if you are distributing this book or this literature, you are, it's, let's say, it is possible to put you in the prison. And because this literature is connected to Hizb ut-Tahrir, and this is terrorist organization in Russia, and so it's enough. Officially, it's really difficult to say, but there is a group that let's say can serve their Juma namaz, yes, their prayers, and it's legal for them. And according to this, we can say that they are cooperating with Russian. I guess that this goes from imams. So the imam of the community is cooperating with the government, and during his let's say speech in mosque or his activities, he is trying not to say something bad about Putin or whatever. So this rhetoric we have in Ukraine from this pro-Russian organization, that they said, we are not, please not try to involve us in the politics. We are just praying here and we believe to our God, and that's it. But it's impossible for Muslims, even not only in the Arab countries or even in Europe. For Muslim, it is impossible on this level to be apolitical, because the politics, religion, and culture mixed in their head. They cannot use the same strategy as we have in Europe, when secular people and etc. It's something strange. Yes, we can see the Muslims that are nominal, not practical, but a nominal Muslim, that they can drink some beer and so on. But in a sense that they cannot say that I'm apolitical or I'm, let's say, secular or whatever that we have in Europe. So in this case, the really strong part of Crimea Tatars, they have the good connection and relationship with the government, but another one is on the ground. That's how propaganda is working. So, Emanuele.
Okay. In Italy, there are some national and
greetings with Euro.
regional.
Forza Italia.
Grazie. There are some national and regional very restricted laws about building mosque for security motivation, I think, and but also for new worship building, also for evangelical, but especially for Islamic community. The only one mosque in Italy, the only one, is in Rome, the biggest one, but it's only official one in Italy. Yes, there are a lot of places in which
Islamic cultural centers
are Islamic center. Near my parish, there is one. I go to sharing for the greetings for the sacrifice for Ramadan and so on. But is the same in Ukraine or not?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. And first of all, I'm a big fan of Squadra Azzurra from 1998, so I'm so happy that they beat England. But returning to our lecture, well, actually, we have just several mosques, not like a temple or Islamic culture, but a mosque. And I can show you the small example about the Lviv. It's our spiritual capital of our country, let's say. It's the city really close to Polish border, like 70 kilometers. And then when the war started with Russia, a lot of Crimea Tatars moved to Lviv as the most, let's say, free city to live, and etc. And they asked our city major, that we need to build a mosque. And he was shocked, surprised, because the Greek Catholic, but then he asked the Sheikh Said, the head of Muslims in Ukraine, and he traveled to Lviv, and he said that we are not ready right now, we are not so strong to build a mosque, and especially in the present time, it may, let's say, it may play a bad joke with the Muslims. So the better option is to build the Islamic Culture Center, huge, nice, and so on. So from my point of view, but in Kiev we have a huge mosque, and also in other cities. I guess that officially it's not a problem to build a mosque. So you can receive all permissions that are necessary, but it might be tension, not about dedicated to Islamophobia or Islam is the evil and etc., but that our people are really Christians, and they are not ready to see mosque close to their church. So, but that I guess will change from year to year, but now it's not a problem. So it's legal and it's possible to build a mosque. But the Muslim communities, they are trying to build Islamic culture centers because it's cheaper, and it's easy to build. It's easy to use the house for prayer and etc. So in our country, it's not an issue. But I know that in the Netherlands, for example, in Amsterdam, there are 30 mosques. Only in Amsterdam. In Utrecht, it's 29, and The Hague, it's 31, and in Rotterdam, where the city major is a Muslim, it's like 32 mosques. So for the small Netherlands, and you can see that even in that place, it's not a tension, but people now, they are trying to say, okay, our politics of blind tolerance, that we are welcome. Well, what now we need to start thinking, what should we deal with Muslims, not refugees only, but Muslims. And I lived 5 years in the Netherlands in the Arab, let's say, Arab parts of the city, and even the Coca-Cola or other, let's say, breads or whatever, they use the Arabic language. So it means that you're living in the Arab country. And for Dutch people, it was the surprise. Hey, but we expect that you will live like we, like Dutch people. But they said no, and it means, and the Imam of Utrecht told me that those Muslims who are moving from the Arab countries to the Netherlands, they are starting to be more practical, and more, let's say, they like better Muslims according to the rituals than they were in the Arab country. Because when you're in minority, you are trying to defend your religion, to preach more and more and more. So that is why Muslims that are, for example, in the Netherlands, they are really the huge, like well educated. They are, there are a lot of like business from Morocco and etc. that are present in the Netherlands, because Dutch government pays a lot to support these communities. And so the Muslim community is really strong in the Netherlands. In Germany, the Turkish, the Kurdi community, and also the refugees, they mixed. So it depends what kind of Islam we are searching for, and it depends from country to country. So in Ukraine, it's not an issue, but Muslim community is really, they are not weak, they are strong according to their people, let's say, followers, and number of their followers, they are strong, but it's not enough, to say that Islam is really big player in the Ukrainian religious map.
A particular difficulty for Muslims in Italy is that our government think Islam like Catholic Church, and say, who is your Pope? Who is your Bishop? How many are your parishes, and so on. And the difficult that there is not only one chief, only one community. There are many communities, national communities, very different. And the problem for our government is to meet and to sign a document for all or for these communities is a problem, because our government think other religion in the same thing in which there are relationship with Vatican.
That's the reality. In this case, the Dutch example might be really useful. I remember that in Utrecht, the Dutch police, I guess, they created the special police that are working only in the Arab place of the city, so they can speak Arabic, and they realized what Kurban Bayram or Raza Bayram is meaning, sacrifice, and etc. And the most danger, the biggest danger from Islam or from Islamic communities that we have in Europe are coming from imams. And what is really how to control the Muslim community is to listen what imam is talking about. And in the Netherlands, they let's say fixed that problem, and so the policeman, he can understand Arabic, so he is joining the mosque, and he is listening he can listen what imam is talking about. So if it is something radical or something, let's say, against the Dutch government, that was really usual topic from him to react. In this way, the Islam, or let's say the fundamentalism and radicalism in the basic level is fixing, is cutting off. So maybe this Dutch example might be useful, but I don't know. It's not about the police controlling their religion, but it's these policemen, they are Muslims, so they are visiting mosque to pray, but also they are familiar what imam is saying, because let's say 15 years ago the rhetoric of imam was like, we are here the minorities and we need to defend our faith, we need to struggle with government, we need to show our, let's say, our values, rules, and etc. Now it's more or less, and even when we are talking about the children, now from year to year, it is less, the index, the number of children, I mean, in the Muslim families there is reducing. So it's from year to year. So in some cases, they are looking for European cultural aspects and trying to integrate in some cases. Yes, but thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and I'm not sure whether Father Roman is here. I will write down. Yeah, this is my name and surname again. Maybe you have it in the program, but it will be a pleasure for me to join, make a friendship on Facebook or other social media platforms.
Yes, I need to talk to you because I'm working with the Interreligious dialogue, so I'm going to contact you because I want to learn more about. And also, my PhD project is Interreligious dialogue.
I will be really
especially
happy.
the monotheism. Okay, thank you.
Oh, that's the brilliant topic. So you have my contact. Please contact me Instagram via Instagram or Facebook, and we will be in touch. So for me, it's a pleasure. So thank you for